All right, welcome back. So we think we're ready to deploy this thing. One thing that I typically recommend you do before you deploy is you look to see what it looks like on the two different devices for development. So for example, on my Nexus 5, it would look like this. You can see what it looks like on an iOS device by clicking this iOS device. There's always a little bit of bugginess on like how whether it refreshed properly or things like that. But there's actually a built-in thing you can do instead, and this was mentioned over here. At some point, try changing your URL to localhost 8100 / Ionic Lab, and that's what I've done over here. And what the Ionic Lab lets you do is it lets you see kind of side by side what it looks like, and then it's also got some other things over here. But you can see what it would look like on iOS and Android. So this one over here is obviously iOS, and then this one's Android. I'd say that looks pretty good to me. It looks like you could, select different platforms and do it full screens, things like that. But that Ionic Lab thing is kind of neat. All right, so let's go ahead and do some deployments. So there's a bunch of different options. So I'll come over here and I'm serving, and I don't really need to be serving anymore. So if you want to, you can stop serving. You can see it's yelling at you about DB not being used. I think that's still necessary, even though it claims it's not being used, because I think that does the initialize app. I should try it without it someday, but I'm not too worried about it now. So for deployment, one thing you can do and should do is deploy it just like we've always been deploying. So Firebase init for hosting. And you should set up, where you want it to go to. So for me, it's Ionic Favorite Things. For you, maybe you're just going to blow away your old favorite things. That's fine. The directory is www. This is different. So the Ionic CLI called it www. The Angular CLI called it dist, but here we say www. Configures a single page web app, you betcha. Override that, no siree. And so there it's initialized. And so the thing that's different is normally this is where we do like an ng build prod. But we don't have to do that with Ionic. So we just skip that step. We go straight to Firebase Deploy. And so whenever I do my Firebase Deploy, it says it's preparing the directory for upload, and then it does its little upload. And then it's going to give you the link that you're going to need to go to. For me, that link is Fisher DS Ionic Favorite Things. So when I hit refresh here, it brings in my new and improved web app. So there it says that it's done. That works fine. And so what I want to do, it says there's error in here. I'm going to ignore that because I don't think that was really me. So for this class, if you're taking it for credit, you need to submit this URL and you're done. But what I want to do is I want to show you what Ionic is really all about. And what Ionic is really all about is it's all about making native apps, right? So this is just my Firebase init. By the way, there are a few more things you could do to make it a progressive web app. Right now, it's just kind of like a web app. Progressive web apps do a lot more caching and things like that. But what I want to focus on is iOS and Android. And so if you go into their documentation, so there's some area in here about, I think it's under intro deploying that talks about like, what do you need to do to get these set up on devices? And really it comes down to, you can run commands like Ionic Cordova run and Ionic Cordova add packages and things like that. So there's a lot of information in here. I'm going to do only kind of the bare bones steps that are necessary. And what I'm going to do is if you're using it on a Mac, your first step is you need to type xcode select -- install. I've already done that, so it just says that it's already been installed. The next thing you need to do is run Ionic Cordova. As you recall, Ionic is just kind of a wrapper for Cordova, so these steps are really Cordova doing stuff. And we're going to say platform add. And you can see commands like this from the CLI, right? So from the CLI, you can see like Cordova platform. So it says you have to say, what action you want, add, and then which platform. So Cordova platform add iOS. What that'll do is that'll actually generate some files for me. It says that, oh, something's not installed. Would you like to install it? Yes, please. I would love to install it. So it installs an npm command. I like that it just typed it for me, which was kind of nice. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a couple changes for us. I'm just going to wait for that to finish up. So it looks like it finally finished. Took a little while there. And so now what it's added so far is it's added a platform folder for me. So if I look in here, I can see now I've got this platforms, and it says platforms iOS, which is good. Now I can run Ionic Cordova build iOS. And so now it's going to actually build an iOS app for me, which is kind of cool. So it's going through and building an iOS app. And once it's done with this step, the next steps are going to happen over in Xcode, right? I've seen this error before. What is this one? Can't resolve promise polyfill. You know what? When you get error messages, you just go look them up and you see if you can figure it out. So let's see, what's the first hit on this one? Looks like this has a lot of upvotes. Not sure why this is necessary, but it's something to do with, it's easy to type, something to do with Angular Fire and polyfill promise. And you know what? People have run into this error and they've solved it for me, right? So try it again. Ionic Cordova build iOS. Maybe things like that will get fixed in future versions and things like that. But it was easy enough for me to fix a little Angular Fire issue there. So now it's building the app. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open up Xcode. So you can see that cross-compiling is really only useful if you're kind of already on a Mac and you're already kind of an Xcode developer, because it creates the project for you, right? Is what it does. So if I come into here and I find my Ionic Favorite Things, and then I go into Platforms, and I go into iOS, you can see that it now has an iOS project that I can open. Once Xcode is open, there's a couple more things you need to do. I make apps with Xcode all the time, so I've already got all the tools up to date and things like that. The next steps that you have to do over in Xcode is you have to set your bundle identifier. So it called it Ionic Starter, so I would call it Ionic probably Favorite Things. And then you need to set up your team. Your team can just be, your personal team as an Xcode developer. That's fine. And then you can just run it on a simulator. So I'll run it on a iPhone 7 simulator. Some warnings and things over here. I'm sure the Cordova people can worry about warnings. I don't really care about warnings. And then once it starts to pop up, you can see that it now has an app, which is a fully functional app, right? And so you can see that this is, so go to my deployed. So this is an app for iPhone. It's got an icon. It says My App, which I could set, of course. But if I change it to green or blue or red or purple, you can see that I've got an Xcode app. And if I wanted to put it onto the App Store, I'd follow all the normal put it on the App Store steps that you would normally see. It's a standard Xcode project, which is cool. If you want to do Android, it's a lot of the same steps. So there was this Cordova platform add Android, or said iOS before. I'm going to say Android instead. And so it does some Android-y things, which I'll just wait for those to finish. And then once that finishes, you can say Ionic Cordova build Android, and it'll build the Android app for you, which is pretty neat. Once it builds an app, you're going to want to open Android Studio. So I'll just, while it's finishing over here, I'll go ahead and start the steps. I'll say open application, and I'll navigate to the right place, which for me was like a million levels deep, but I finally found it. So Ionic Favorite Things, it finished while I was trying to find the folder. So platforms, I now have an Android folder in here, and I just opened the Android folder. So I opened this up in Android Studio, and it asked me about some Gradle updates. Fine, I don't mind Gradle updates. And so what I'm going to do is in Android, I like to plug in my device. I just find that works faster. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it in here, and that opens up Visor, which is kind of a neat app that just reflects it. And then I'm going to say run to my Nexus 5 device. So this is my home screen for my device. I guess I can try to make it a little smaller here. But what it's doing is it is installing the Android app to my device. And again, just like with Xcode, like all the steps from here are standard, just like it's any other app, which is cool. And I can click it on my phone here. I can click blue and it goes to blue. I can click red and it goes to red. And then for some reason, I think this is fun, but you've got all these different platforms, and you can kind of like set them all side by side. So if I change the iOS simulator, they all change. If I change, on my iPhone, you can see the website changes. You can see the iPhone app changes. That's all just standard Firebase magic, which I think is cool, right? All right, so we have now deployed this in a variety of ways. There were a couple little changes that happened when we added Android, so we'll check that in. So add platforms for iOS and Android. And you can see that that things are going just fine and dandy, and it's pretty cool how the skills you've learned with a different tool like Ionic can be used pretty quickly to make iPhone apps, to make Android apps. But again, for this class, the only thing you ever have to submit is the Firebase URL to the web app. But I just think that's so cool. Also, as a clarification, I'm not expecting you to use Ionic on your projects. This is just kind of a fun little extra thing that we're teaching you something about. All right, that is it for this unit. We will see you next time, where we'll do a little bit more with Ionic just to do a slightly more significant app. See you next time. Bye.